and welcome back. We're going to be now joined by the wonderful Carl Sargunar. Hello, Carl.
Hello.
Good evening, afternoon, happy time zone, everyone,
Good
wherever you're
afternoon,
watching from.
evening, yeah,
Good
wherever you
evening,
are.
yes.
It's great to see you, and I like your hoodie. Where did you get that?
This I actually got from the South Coast Summit. I won a competition over there to get a hoodie, so yeah, I'm quite happy with that one.
Very good. Very,
I've got
very
my
good.
Umbraco t-shirt on underneath it, but you can't really see the
Yeah.
the Umbraco t is on underneath as well.
You can just see your glow-in-the-dark headphones. That's about it. No.
Yes.
So
Everything is glow in the dark over here.
yeah,
It's gotten very dark suddenly.
yeah. Well,
It's winter time.
mid-January, right?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. So you're going to be talking to
Energy
us today.
levels all up over there?
Yeah. We're still going strong. Still going strong. We're gonna power through. So you're going to talk to us about containers, which I think it would be safe to say you've sort of become the Umbraco community aficionado on, because you've done a workshop, you've done various talks before, articles, blogs, videos, I think even for 24 days.
Yeah, I've done a few. It's a hobby of mine to kind of play around with the new things around the periphery, and containers is just one of those things that are really exciting. And I saw that whilst the rest of the web development world and the architecture world is moving in that direction, until I started kind of picking it up, there wasn't a huge amount of content that crossed over to the Umbraco world. It's great to see, though, that other people are actually also picking this up now. There was a talk earlier about bringing in microservices into applications. So it's not just one or two of us now. There's more people in the community, which is fantastic to see. You know, we need more of this. Umbraco can't be the CMS that's left behind, and it won't be. It's definitely moving in the right direction. So.
For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, whenever you're ready, Carl, take it away. Looking forward to this.
I am ready. Let me just share my screen. I will share that one. Okay. Screen share should be coming through, hopefully. Can you see my screen? I'm assuming someone will press a button at some point in time to... There we go. Right. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to everyone today about containers and Umbraco. I'm specifically going to be using Docker, and I'm going to be building a load balanced site entirely in Umbraco. This is based on the workshop I gave last year at the Code Garden Festival, but I've upgraded it to .NET 7 and Umbraco 11, which is the latest version out. A little bit about me. I'm Carl. I blog on my website, although I'm ashamed to say not as often as I'd like to. I'm probably more often active on Twitter or places like that, and I try and run meetups. I also run the .NET Southwest meetup in Bristol, so there's a few communities I'm involved in. So yeah, this is me. So to start with, a lot of us, when we build Umbraco sites, will be used to this, the monolithic architecture, where we build everything into a single site, even if that involves external libraries, even if that involves multiple projects. We tend to have this kind of monolithic view of we build everything at once and we deploy it all at once. And this is fine. You know, this is how even still today most Umbraco sites are built, and there are some fantastic sites that are being built this way. Nothing absolutely wrong with it at all. But more and more sites are moving to this MAC architecture, the micro architecture, which is focused. The MAC acronym stands for microservices, API based access, cloud first and cloud native, and focusing in a headless way. So rather than the content management and the content environment being everything, it is a part of a wider application where you have your data source, you have a front end which is separated. You're able to independently deploy these various pieces. They're testable separately. This does add more complexity to it, so that's one of the driving forces that I used to basically create this talk and kind of expand out last year. So what I'm going to be doing today is going through a few of the concepts that are around containers, specifically what Docker is. Containers are not new. They've been around a few years. They're largely seen as a way of, packaging up your application or your service or your module with all the dependencies, all the configuration into a single repeatable deployable unit. And Docker is, one of the leaders in the field, but there are other options for containers. There are open container standards out there, so you don't need to rely on just using Docker. There are a whole suite of alternatives. Docker also provide, it's not just the service. They also provide a whole bunch of tools to help you run locally. So Docker for Windows is what I'll be using on my local environment to do a demo later on in this. But they also have a public repository of all publicly available containers. So you can go and check those out. So, oh, why is that slide happened twice? Never mind. Containers and virtual machines are sometimes kind of confused, or rather, it can be it can be easily confused, but effectively there are quite a few differences between the concept of a virtual machine and a container. The virtual machine is what, before the cloud and even sometimes in the cloud, how a lot of applications were hosted, where you have a host machine and then you can subdivide that host machine into various guest machines, but each guest machine needs their own operating system on top of which you build your application. So you're using resources not only on the host operating system, but also the guest operating system. The different approach that containers take is that containers don't virtualize the hardware. They basically run on top of the host operating system. So what containers do is they give the application access to the host operating system. One way to think about it, virtual machines virtualize the hardware, but containers virtualize the operating system. Now, what that does mean is that there are some restrictions on how you can run certain containers. Windows and Linux are two different container flavors, but you can run a Linux container on Windows. You just need to install the Windows subsystem for Linux. Unfortunately, you can't run Windows containers on a Linux host because there is no Windows, or there's no Windows Linux subsystem for Windows. They're the inverse of that. There are a few Docker concepts. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. I'm kind of going to spend most of my time on the demo. But if you want to know more about this stuff, there are a few links at the end of this documentation, and there's also a GitHub repo. So if you want to find out more, read about it. The primary things that we're going to touch on here are Docker files, which are effectively used to define your container application and all the various parts you need: the configuration, the ports, the base image. Docker Compose, which is a tool to kind of spin up and shut down multi-container applications at the same time. And yeah, Docker Hub, which is a repository, which could be, which is where I'm going to be getting my images from for this demo. But some companies have private repositories too, very similar to NuGet. A container is made up primarily of the first thing is the image the container is based on. Every container is based on some image out there, whether that's a very lightweight, slim Linux installation. So Alpine is one of the smallest distributions out there, and a container that's running an Alpine instance could be something as small as 50 megabytes. There are probably smaller ones out there now, but they're really, really tiny. Now, if you compare that 50 megabyte size with an application potentially running on it with a virtual machine, you're going to get much bigger, pushing into the gigabytes for some of these virtual machines. So below the actual base image of your container, you then have your application, whether that be, in our instance, an Umbraco site. It could be a database server. It could be message queue service. It could be a cache. There is a whole suite of applications and services that are exposed and available. Then you have your networking layer. So typically, you wouldn't tend to deploy a container in isolation. Containers are part of wider applications. So you want all parts of your application to be able to communicate with each other, and containers and their managers like Docker, like Kubernetes, allow you to handle networking between your containers. And the last piece that's important to consider is storage. So when you create your container, you have a combination of kind of the internal storage of the container, which is part of the container, and obviously you can change files inside there, but you have to bear in mind that if that container stops or is deleted for any reason, that storage is lost. So to get around that storage persistence problem, you can also use something called volume storage, which allows you to use a proportion of the host storage and make that available in a container. The typical example here would be if I had a database server, I wouldn't want my database files to be deleted every time the container stopped. So I would be able to use database storage on the host, and then if the container is deleted, start it again, it'd be fine. Oh, there we go. I've just talked about volumes and storage. So yeah, you've got internal storage and you've got storage on the host. I'm going to skip past this. Networking, I touched on briefly, but you know, if you just have a container in isolation in development or in a production environment, if you don't put it on a network, it'll typically also be visible to any other container that's not on a network. But you can also group containers together. Docker uses something called a bridge network. So you can either have the default bridge network, which is all containers and everything is accessible, or you can have user-defined bridge networks. The difference between a user-defined bridge network and the default one is in the default one, you can't use the container name to access other containers. You can only use IP address, which can be problematic because you've no way of knowing what the container IP address is. But if you create a bridge, you create your own bridge network, and create your own network of the containers in your application, and you'll see an example of that later. You can access each other through DNS container names. So what I would like to demo, if I have time with 20 minutes left, is we're going to start with a basic Umbraco site, and I'm then going to create a database container to run that site with. I'm going to create a second Umbraco site. So we'll kind of split these between a content authoring site and a content delivery site. So where that's going to come from. I'm going to create an API on that site, and I'm going to fire that off to a Blazor WebAssembly in another container. I've got Maui and static web apps as potential other kind of consumers of that content. I'm not going to build that as part of this demo, but it's just kind of there to illustrate that I can create this kind of application where we have a content authoring site, a delivery site, and then consumption in one of multiple. Oh dear, my animations have completely failed over there. Forgive me. Okay, I'm just going to. There we go. Right, so the way we will do it is I'll start on a local machine and I'll build everything on my own machine without containers, and then I'll slowly move them into containers and finally put them into one application and run them all together. Right, 18 minutes left. Let's jump into the demo. I'll send this link out again later, but if you'd like to follow along or if you'd like to go and try it yourself later, all the code that I'm using today, all my slides, everything is available at that GitHub URL, so give it a go. Yeah, right. I am going to switch. So this is the GitHub page, and the URL is all here. So I've cloned this down already, but we're going to start with this workshop. At the top, there's a list of tools that you can use and some instructions, but effectively, I'm going to jump down to here. I'm going to open up this site and I am going to start. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new Umbraco site. Now I've already run the template install to make sure I've got Umbraco 11. So I'm just going to skip that step. Actually, no, let's do it properly. So I'm going to create a folder called working, and I'm going to set my terminal to go into that folder. And I'm going to make sure this is there, and you can see it's already installed. So that's fine. I'm now going to use the unattended install, and I'm going to create my Umbraco site. I'm specifically using LocalDB for this example because I want the database files to allow me to later put those into the container for the database container. But for right now, it's just running locally with LocalDB. I'm now going to install the clean package, high five to Paul Seal for this one. This is another awesome package, which I basically use in every single one of my demos because it's one of the simplest ones out there and it's really cool. Right, now I'm going to run my site. And if everything works well, once .NET spins up, just taking a second. Whilst I'm waiting for this to spin up, I'll just talk through the repository. So in here, I've got kind of pre-created files, so to save me typing it all out again, I'm going to be copying and pasting a lot from there. There's also a workshop complete, which is effectively the entire workshop in its final state. So if you want to just skip to the end, you can go ahead and do that. But obviously you wouldn't get as much value out of it. Right, hopefully this site is now spinning up, so no errors, and there we go. Right, so the clean starter kit is up, and I can go to Umbraco and I can log in. Password. Right, so you can see this is a bulk standard Umbraco installation, and it is using the clean starter kit. Okay, so we've got our template, we've got a site. So now I'm going to create a database container. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back in here. I'm going to stop the site, and in my working folder, I'm going to create a folder called UMB data. That's going to be our database containers folder. Now here we have the Docker file for our container. So this, in a nutshell, is telling Docker this is the image we want to use. We're going to use SQL Azure so that it will work on x86 or ARM chips on M1 and that kind of thing. We're going to create a few environmental variables because that's what's needed to run SQL. I'm going to tell Docker which ports I want to expose, and I'm going to run a couple of scripts, and I'm also going to copy my data files into that container. So I'm going to create this Docker file inside here. Oops. Paste this in. One thing you need to make sure, this is a historic thing with Windows, you need to make sure your line endings are line feed, because this file is going to be running in Linux, not on Windows. So I've just down here, you can change it to line feed or carriage return line feed. There's info about this in the repo anyway. So I'm going to copy these other two files. What these two files are doing are effectively, this is a delayed startup script, which basically waits for the container to run, and then we'll fire off this script called setup.sql. And all setup.sql is doing is reattaching our Umbraco database. So because we ran the site locally, there should be in the data folder, there we go, there's our database. I'm going to take that, put that in there. Again, I'm just following instructions that are inside here. So we've just copied all our files into the folder. So the next thing we're doing is we're going to create our database container. So the first thing I have to do is build the database containers image. So that command. Now this is not going to take so long on my machine because I have already cached the dependency containers. The first time you run this, it takes a bit longer because you need to get those containers down. Now I'm going to just fire up Docker Desktop. So this is the tool on Windows which lets me run containers locally, and you can see I don't have any containers running right now. I have some stopped containers, but those aren't relevant for this demo. So I'm now going to start up this container, and I'm going to tell Docker to run this container and expose it in port 1433. And I'm also going to tell it to use this volume so that its SQL data files are not held on the container itself. So here we go. So that container is now running, and is that container not running? You know why? I forgot to run. Yes, there we go. So you know what I said about the Docker file has to be line feed. The same is true of the SQL files and the startup files. So I actually need to rebuild my image. Need to delete this. There you go. So I didn't change the line endings for that one, but it ended badly. There we go. So now our database server is running, and I can connect to that if I wanted to, but I don't need to. I'm just going to plow on ahead because I've got 10 minutes left. Wow, that's gone fast. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my container into a network so that my other containers can connect to it. Now, in my local instance, this network already exists, but there you go, network already exists, but that's fine. I'm now going to add my database container into the network. So there we go. So if I was to run this network inspect, it would show me that my container is in the network, which is great. Okay, so we now have a database container and a local site. The site is not in a container right now, so this site is just running locally on my instance. I actually want to put my Umbraco site into a container now. So let's put a Docker file together for the Umbraco site. So in the web folder, we're going to create a new Docker file. And I'm going to paste this in here. I'm just going to deactivate content. Sorry, you're going to creep at me otherwise. So this Docker file is basically saying, here's a .NET SDK to build our project. We're then going to compile it, and then we're going to copy the output to our running instance. So we're going to run it on just the runtime image. I'm also going to copy the media. You wouldn't normally do this in a production environment, but this is just for the demo so that the container has something pretty to look at. Right, so I've run my image. I'm also going to create a connection string. So inside here, what I'll do, go to the files and just take app settings, staging, and put that inside here. So the only difference is with my local environment, I'm going to use local DB, but when I run it in the staging environment, which is going to be, if I go back to my slides, this kind of environment where I'm manually creating all the containers, I want it to connect to the relevant SQL DB on the UMB data. So that's done. So now I'm going to build the image for my website container. Again, this won't take very long on here because I've done this before, but if I was to do this the first time, it would take a bit longer. Okay, and nearly done. Done. Lovely. So I've got my image built. I can now run my container. Now I'm going to run this, and at the same time, I'm going to tell it to use the network UMB net, just to use the command line to tell it to kind of be on the same network as my database container so they can communicate with each other. And there we go. So we've got a database container and a website container, and I can see database is exposing port 1433, and I can click on this and it should open up inside our container the Umbraco site. Whilst that's spinning up, I'm going to copy some more files. So oh, there we go. So it's spun up. So this is now running from inside our container, and I can stop our container very quickly, and this will simply start it up again. It should come back. Right. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the API so that our Blazor site can get to this. So I've already created the controllers. If I go back to here, I have got controllers and a models folder. So I'm just going to put those into here. And I also need to take the contents of this startup so that I can tell just create an open course policy to allow the API to be accessible. So I'm going to place that there. And what else do I need to do? Startup, controllers and models, and now rebuild the image. There we go. So let's go and rebuild our image because we've made some changes to it. When you rebuild an image, it'll only rebuild from the point where things are changed. So in this instance, I'm changing the underlying project. It has to build everything. But if you make a change at this point in time, anything above there will be cached effectively. So that's a really useful kind of feature of Docker. It only rebuilds things it needs to. Right, so our image is built. I'm going to remove the website containers. I'm running that. Now I'm going to run it again. And this time, as well as the website, when it runs, spinning up. Yep, there we go. I should also be able to see a, this is Postman. I'm just going to use this to call the API. There we go. So I can see an API, and I'm just going to quickly log into and let's go and change one of these blog articles. Publish this. If I go and query this again, you should see hello Umbraco Community Day has come through the API. So my API is reading the same content from the Umbraco site, and it's all running from within that container. Now, if I wanted to, I could run a second instance of that container. So we talked about the application authoring instance versus the, gosh, I'm running out of time, versus the running instance. So let's do that quickly. And now I'm gonna have to just jump ahead. Right, okay, we want to get a Blazor app together to display that content from the API that we're calling. So I run the Blazor site. I'm going to copy some files, models, pages, and app settings. So sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit over here, but these things happen very quickly. So I'm going to put models inside there. I'm going to take the content of this fetch razor pages into there, and here, and settings. I'm going to put that into here, and then I'm going to run the Blazor project. Whilst that's running, to save time, I'm going to skip ahead and create a Docker container for my Blazor site too. So it's got line feed. Okay, so our Blazor site should be running. And if I fetch data, there we go. So it's pulling content from our container, which is pulling it from the database all the way through. Right, so now we've done 2 minutes. We've done everything at this point in time. We're 2 content authoring, 1 Blazor and database. The final step is to wrap it all together in a single application. Can I do it in a minute and a half? So, first thing, I've created a Docker file. Okay, I now need to copy the Nginx file as well. So let's do that. So Blazor doesn't use Kestrel to run because this is a Blazor WebAssembly app, so it pushes everything to the client. So I can just use Nginx, which is a much lighter host, and I have an Nginx configuration in my Docker file to say run under Nginx. I'm then going to skip that bit just to make sure that all works. And I need to copy Docker Compose production and production. Okay, so we're now going to skip to the final part where I'm going to wrap all this into a single Docker Compose file. Now, Docker Compose effectively wraps up all three parts. So we've got the first part, which is our database, our backend server, our front-end server, and our Blazor application, all wrapped into 4 various containers. We're going to define the networks for each of them. We're going to define the database, the storage for each of them, and we're going to run them all in one go, as if by magic, in 1 minute. Ooh, tight. What am I missing? I'm missing that in here, and this one, last one. Yeah, right. So I need to remove these containers. So I'm going to kill my existing containers. Ooh. I'm going to run Docker Compose build. Oh, brilliant. 2 seconds, let me get with you. So this Docker Compose build is now building all the containers. So if you look at Docker now, there are no containers right now. They've all been kind of wiped out. So the Docker Compose is now going through this Docker Compose file and building all the containers. So our database image, our backend image, but it will use the images we've already created. So it shouldn't take as long. However, the Blazor image hasn't been built yet. So the Blazor image is the first one, the longest one that's going to take. And as that's all building, I'm just going to wrap up by also just going through my final slides while that's loading up to say, when you learn new stuff, there's a lot to learn. So don't worry about reaching out to the community. I'm on Twitter, but there's a load of other people in the community as well. So if you need to reach out, do try and reach out to us. My links to my repo, I'll tweet them out again later. Is this finished? Yeah, that's finished. So finally, the last thing we need to do, too many tabs, is run Docker Compose up, which will create all our instances inside here. There we go. So we've got our application, we've got a backend, a front end, and a Blazor. And our database didn't work. Okay. Oh, there we go. We're out of time now, but that is all the demos there. Something has gone wrong, but for some reason, the database container hasn't come up. I'll be curious if there's anything inside there. But I imagine you'll probably want to move on to Matt unless we have time. I'm going to keep going until someone stops me. So jump in and stop me if you want to stop me.
Hey, Carl.
Hello.
Oh, there we go.
You asked for it.
Yeah, we were just talking about how impressive it is that you've squished a 2-hour workshop effectively into a 30-minute talk. So fair play to you. And considering the number of demos you had, if the only thing that didn't work was a database spinning up at the end, kudos. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that was fun. Whew, I need a coffee now.
Definitely.
I say the code's all on GitHub, so if you want to go check it out. And if you want to reach out on Twitter, give me a shout. And there's a lot more. I plan to do further talks about this going forward, so there's more content around this. I didn't get a chance to talk about when you actually host it. Azure has Azure Front Door, which will allow you to handle load balancing between the containers. There's various ways of hosting this in Azure with container instances and Kubernetes services and all that kind of stuff. So a lot had to be covered.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I look forward.
It's a fascinating topic.
I look forward to more content on containers and Docker and whatnot from you in the future. That sounds really awesome. Thank you very much, Carl, for joining us. And
no worries.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Alrighty. So
bye, everyone.
In a couple of minutes, we are going to be back with our unfortunately final speaker for the event. However, it's the one I've been looking forward to probably the most.
Absolutely.
So
Callum has told this so many times during the day.
I've said it a lot.
Yeah.
I've said it a lot. We'll be back in a second.